Welcome back to Face the Nation, continuing our conversation about the Hillary emails with Senator Chuck Schumer. Do you believe, Senator, that she is obligated to come forward and give some sort of public explanation of why she did this?
Well, the bottom line is very simple, Bob, and that is she completely complied with the law. Different secretaries of state have made different choices. Colin Powell, I think, did it similar to her. But she's turning over more documents than anybody else, 55,000. I think she's come forward more than just about anybody else has.
But doesn't this sort of, it may not be illegal, but does it really pass the smell test? Because, after all, by doing it the way she did it, she could delete emails without anybody knowing she deleted them.
Well, the law is that you preserve the emails, and no one has alleged that any of them were deleted. The fact that she had so many of them, the fact that she turned them over, by the way, before all this became public. I think in October, the State Department asked all secretaries of state to send their emails over, and she's the only one who has done it. Gainsays any of that.
Well, doesn't this sort of reinforce what some of the critics have said about the Clinton family over the years, that they'll cut a corner when they can, and we have this now. We have the disclosures about foreign governments giving to the Clinton Foundation. It just seems to raise a whole lot of issues that people used to have, and it looks like they're back in the news.
Well, look, the bottom line is she's a national figure, a potential presidential candidate. People are going to shoot at her. I know her. We were the two senators from New York for 8 years. She is one of the most finest, most upstanding, most honorable people, always trying to do the right thing, cares deeply about the country and the middle class. So, this is politics. This is how it is. But I don't think the public's going to pay much attention to this. They care much more about middle-class people, who's going to get their wages going up again, who's going to create good-paying jobs. These are the issues that matter to people, despite the little storm we have in Washington right now.
Let me turn to the Iran deal. You heard Prime Minister Netanyahu this morning. You heard President Obama. Should Congress vote and approve a deal with Iran if, in fact, one is reached?
Well, if one is reached, I think Senator McConnell overreached when he put the bill on the floor without bipartisan support. The Israel-American relationship has always been bipartisan. I was interested to hear him not unequivocally say they'd raise the debt ceiling either. That's a little bit of gamesmanship, not an answer to your question, but I think worth noting. But the bottom line is this. First, Congress passed the sanctions itself. So Congress has very much an interest in the sanctions. It's not like the president's negotiated some arrangement far away and Congress had no say. And second, Congress is going to have to do something about this anyway, because Iran will never sign an agreement where they stay permanent and the president waives them. There's going to be a new president in another year and a half. So what the Corker bill did is lay out a way to do it. It shouldn't be done, and I pushed that it shouldn't be done before there's an agreement, if there is an agreement, at the deadline of the 24th. But after that, yes, Congress has a right to weigh in, and I support it.
All right. Well, Senator, thank you so much for being
Thanks,
with us
Bob.
this morning.
Appreciate it.
We'll be right back. Yesterday marked the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, the march for voting rights from Selma to Montgomery that ended in protesters being beaten and bloodied by police. One of those protesters who was injured that day, Congressman John Lewis, made the march again yesterday, along with President Obama, former President George W. Bush, and other leaders in the civil rights movement.
If someone had told me when we were crossing this bridge that one day I will be back here introducing the first African-American president, I would have said, you're crazy, you're out of your mind, you don't know what you're talking about. President Barack Obama.
With effort, we can protect the foundation stone of our democracy for which so many marched across this bridge, and that is the right to vote. The Voting Rights Act, the culmination of so much blood, so much sweat and tears, the product of so much sacrifice in the face of wanton violence, the Voting Rights Act stands weakened. Its future subject to political rancor. How can that be? The Voting Rights Act was one of the crowning achievements of our democracy, the result of Republican and Democratic efforts. President Reagan signed its renewal when he was in office. President George W. Bush signed its renewal when he was in office. 100 members of Congress have come here today to honor people who are willing to die for the right to protect it. If we want to honor this day, let that 100 go back to Washington and gather 400 more, and together pledge to make it their mission to restore that law this year.
We are joined now by Senator Tim Scott, the first black Republican elected from the South since Reconstruction. He is in Montgomery, Alabama. He was in Selma yesterday. Well, Senator, thank you so much for joining us. You heard the president yesterday make that pitch to Congress to restore the Voting Rights Act. Do you support that, and are you going to push your leadership to run this through the Senate?
I certainly, Bob, I will tell you that I think every single American should demand making sure that every other American has the right to vote. I think we're all on the same page on that. The question is, how do we get there? To specifically punish 6 southern states for atrocities that happened 40 or 50 years ago without updating that formula seems to be discriminatory in and of itself. So what I would support is to take a second view of the Voting Rights Act and look at seeing how we could apply it universally to all Americans, every place, and let's judge people and states based on their performance today and not 40 or 50 years ago.
Well, so in other words, you're not for restoring it as it was, but you want a new version of it.
Yeah, when you look at the triggers back in the 70s and the 60s, the South Carolina no longer qualifies. Let's look at current history, the current state today. Nikki Haley is the governor of South Carolina. She is an Indian American. I was elected statewide to the United States Senate by the voters of South Carolina, and I was first elected to Congress at the start of the Civil War. So there's no doubt about the fact that there has been amazing progress throughout the South, and we should make sure that the formulas that are used do not punish the history of a state, but should represent the present state of affairs.
Senator, let me ask you candidly, how do you think the first black president in America has done in terms of improving race relations?
I would say that we've had probably a neutral position on progressing from a racial perspective in America over the last few years. We have not made as much progress as some would like to have seen. And if you look at specifically the challenges faced by black America, the last 6 years have been challenging. Unemployment rate is near 12% overall. The poverty rate is near 28%. I will tell you that the last 6 years have not been good for most folks, middle America and down. This has not been a good economy for those of us who live in middle class America and moving down. I will tell you that there is a lot of opportunity for progress, and John Lewis spoke about what that looks like going forward, and he specifically said, education is the key. Education is the key. He said it several times yesterday, and I wanted to say it twice because my opportunity agenda focuses on the foundation of the American dream, and it starts with education. You can have a fantastic life here in America, in the South, in the North, in the West, and the East, if you focus your attention on outcomes driven by education.
Let me ask you this, Congressman. Do you think the Justice Department ought to dismantle the police department in Ferguson, as some are suggesting?
You know, I looked at some of the information. I will tell you that the challenges faced by Ferguson Police Department goes very, very deep. So we have to pay close attention to what happens next. I'm not sure what's going to happen next. I don't think the Justice Department knows what's going to happen next, but the thorough investigation is important and necessary.
And let me just close, Senator, by saying I just called you Congressman. I apologize for that. You are the first black senator from the South, since Reconstruction. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you this morning. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me back on Face the Nation.
All right. Also in Montgomery for the anniversary, Benjamin Crump. He represents the families of Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, he's the young boy who was killed in Cleveland, and Michael Brown. We had quite a celebration down in Selma yesterday, Mr. Crump, but it comes in a week that the Department of Justice unveiled a scathing, damning report of racial abuses in the Ferguson Police Department. The outgoing Attorney General, Eric Holder, says he's going to fix that. You think he can?
Remedy, and we have to look at not only what he said in the DOJ report on the Ferguson Police and this scathing report of discrimination and police excessive force on African Americans, but also we have to look at these individual shootings, and we can't have the Department of Justice sanitizing all these shootings of people of color who are unarmed. We have to address that head on, and if we don't have real consequences, then we won't see any different results than what we keep seeing. It's almost epidemic now, Bob, that you see unarmed people of color being killed all over America.
Well, as devastating as this report was, there's not going to be any charges brought against police officer Darren Wilson, who killed that young man. How do you get justice for this family? What happens next?
Well, first of all, we have to look at the high standard, as Attorney General Holder talked about, that you have to prove what was in the mind of the shooter, that it was some hate, some racism. That's such a high standard. And instead of having this explicit bias, it should be where we can show implicit bias. When you look at that report and you see all of these scathing facts come out about racism, don't you think that cesspool of racism spills over to the individual officers? And so we got to address it. We can't stick our head in the sand. If we really want to stop this from happening on the 50th anniversary of Selma, and now we're looking at Ferguson, we have to say, we have to be honest about it, and we have to speak to the issue, and we have to work on the remedy.
All right. Well, Mr. Crump, I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning and for being in Selma yesterday. We'll be back with our panel in just a minute. We turn now to talk about all of this to our panel on a week that we were truly, I don't know about you, but I was overwhelmed by all this news. Ruth Marcus is a columnist for the Washington Post. We welcome April Ryan to the broadcast. She's the White House correspondent for American Urban Radio Networks and the author of The Presidency in Black and White. Margaret Brennan, of course, is our intrepid State Department correspondent. And Jerry Seib, the Washington bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal. April, what did you think of the president's speech? I must say, just from the standpoint of oratory, I thought it's the best speech he's made in a long time.
It is the best speech that he's made in a long time. As a news person, it was impacting. It was chock full of news. He brought in he didn't just talk about the struggle in the black community and what happened 50 years ago in Selma, but he also touched on every community in this nation. He brought us together as we the people. We shall overcome, and yes, we can. And at the end, he brought in that rousing scripture from Isaiah, and he brought it out with a preaching moment, the Obama that we seem to understand and gravitate to when he was running for president.
Well, this was not the college professor speaking in the abstract route that so many people have, expressed some disappointment in the president from time to time. This sounded like a very different kind of speech.
It was very heartfelt, as April said. And also, I thought one of the things that was fascinating was to use this speech not only to discuss the state of African-American America and all America, but also to implicitly answer his critics on the question of American exceptionalism and does he love the sort of underlying question of does he love the country, and to really talk about the exceptionalism of America as being an understanding America as a work in progress and a constant struggle towards improvement. And I thought it was just a fascinating linkage of those two things, especially on a week, as you discussed earlier in the show, that we had this appalling report about Ferguson, to say what a fantastic moment that John Lewis, beaten on the bridge, could be introducing an African-American president, and yet. And it's the "and yet" of America that I thought he did really the most interesting job in the speech on. We are exceptional because we are constantly improving.
Well, Jerry, which brings us to Ferguson. And in the same week that the president makes this speech, you have this big celebration down in Selma. This appalling report comes out. The Justice Department reports on what's going on down there in Ferguson. Do you think that anything that happened this week in Selma will push the administration and the Justice Department to try to do something about that?
Well, I mean, there was a line in the speech that sort of rang in that regard to me. He said, America is strong enough to be self-critical, and that's really what this Justice Department report was about. It was about being strong enough to be critical of the way justice is dispensed in the country right now. And you sort of had a sense that Eric Holder, the Attorney General who's leaving, kind of wanted to leave a legacy here, and he decided, the Justice Department decided there was not going to be a prosecution of the white police officer in Ferguson, but there could be systemic change in the way justice is dispensed, not at the top in Washington, but around the country. So yeah, I think so. I think this is going to start a ball rolling that's going to be moving for a long time and discussed for a long time.
I've got to ask you about the Hillary email story. I mean, you think you've heard everything, and then you get this report. And, you know, those on Hillary Clinton's side immediately say, well, there's actually nothing illegal here. We hit a lot of people have done this in the past. Have a lot of people done this in the past, Margaret?
Emailed? No, not like she did. Secretaries Albright, Powell, and Rice have all said either we didn't email for official business, or you know, when we did, we have gone through, or we don't have access to those records anymore. Hillary Clinton, not only was she an exceptional Secretary of State because of her history as a First Lady, because of her prominence, but she also relied solely on personal email. And that is this new territory. And the State Department lawyers are really sort of hashing this out right now, and to be honest, they seem quite surprised at the outcry, trying to figure out how they're going to possibly sort through these 55,000 pages, redact some of the personal information, then decide, going through the Freedom of Information Act process, what can actually be publicly released. So I don't think we're going to see these emails for a long time in the public space.
Ruth, what's your take on this? I mean, you know, it just revives all those old stories about the Clintons will take advantage whenever they have a chance to take advantage of something.
It sure does, and with all due respect to your guest, Senator Schumer, I think this is a lot more than a hiccup. I won't continue the metaphor, but out of deference to your viewers. But the notion, as Secretary Clinton's folks have been saying, that she complied with the spirit and the letter of the law is simply not true. It was clear to everybody, especially in the aftermath of the controversy over the Bush White House use of personal emails, something Secretary Clinton herself criticized, the use of secret emails, that the better course, if you were going to be a government official using email, was to use your official email. Everybody seemed to know that except for Secretary Clinton. And if you didn't use your official email, you were supposed to make sure that that stuff got transferred, not after the fact, after you left office, after congressional committees asked for it, but in real time.
April, you've covered the Clinton family for a long time.
I have. I find it very interesting. I think former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, likely presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, will have to come out and make a statement about this. You know, we're hearing Gowdy on your show say that the Clintons sent 80,000 pieces of email to the State Department, and the State Department has the onus on this. And the Democrats are saying 55,000. Either way, it's a lot. And Gowdy said that he's looking for Benghazi and Libya, and he hasn't seen the pieces, the emails that he's looking for. So she needs to come out and make clarity before she runs, or potentially runs, for President of the United States.
Why would she do it, Jerry? You've watched Washington for a long time, as I have. Why decide to do this?
You decide to release the emails?
Well, just to decide to have a private email.
Oh, well, that's the real question. That's really what everybody's scratching their head about. Why do it this way? Why subject yourself to this kind of second guessing later? Because now the problem is this will go on for a long time because, as Margaret said, it's going to take a long time to redact 55,000 or 80,000 emails, and B, in the meantime, Bob, this keeps the Benghazi story alive. And that's, of course, what Democrats think this is all about. This was a way to keep the Benghazi questions rolling along for months and months, and that's exactly what's going to happen now. So why put yourself in this position? That's really the question people are scratching their heads about.
But I think if we could imagine ourselves inside Secretary Clinton's mind, we know the answer to this. She has a history, an unfortunate history, and one that she doesn't seem to be adequately learning from, of always erring on the side of keeping things behind closed doors and secret rather than going for full disclosure. And I would guess that she figured this was going to be a better way to protect herself, and not for the first time it's ended up being much more of a harm than doing it the regular way would have ended up being for her.
Well, you know, this team of rivals that President Obama put together in this administration, was it possible that she did this because she didn't want some of the rivals?
Yes.
Does this put these emails out of their reach?
Yes, it's a team. Even though they came together, it was still, the State Department was separate from the White House in a lot of ways. But I can suspect that she was told, and the State Department was told, and what the White House has said and did say, this White House, that all emails should go through the .gov account, the whitehouse.gov account, and anything, and they understand that you have a life before, you have a Gmail, email, whatever other accounts you have, and anything will be transferred. But to not do that, I mean, she just didn't want to conflate both issues. Maybe, we don't know, but she needs to come out and talk about it.
What we know is that in 2008, around that time, a political aide working for the Clinton family set this account up. What we don't know is what the State Department lawyers decided when Hillary Clinton came into office in terms of what was kosher or not. It appears from what President Obama told our colleague Bill Plant that he at least wasn't aware of it, though the State Department had said they did know she often used this personal account. But it has put what is nominally an apolitical building in this incredibly charged political environment making these decisions right now. And right now it does not appear like Hillary Clinton's camp really feels the need to detail any of this.
And one would think if there were a State Department document saying, sure, this is fine, this is a totally kosher, as you say, way to proceed, that we might have seen it by now. Just saying.
Yeah. Is it going to be an issue, Jerry?
Sure, it's going to be an issue. I mean, as you know, as Ruth says, it sort of adds to the narrative. Now, whether that's fair or not, there will be a lot of debate about that, but it's going to be an issue.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. This is one of those things that obviously we're going to hear more about before it's over, and we'll be right back. Well, we'll see you next week. We had so much news today that we had to eliminate my commentary. But if you'd like to see it, please go to our website, facethenation.com. Thanks for watching.